I'm just realizing that, like, before this video game sort of development interest began, I've always relied on community in one way or another.
Hello and welcome to One Cool Thing, a podcast from indie game studio Die Gute Fabrik, hosted by me, Hannah Nicklin. One Cool Thing is a podcast speaking with people in and around video games about one cool thing not from games, which is really making them think differently about how they make video games right now. We're going to introduce them and their practice, talk about their one cool thing, and consider how it's shaping how they think about their work, and in turn, hopefully give us all ways to think differently about how we make our work. So that's the basic concept. Here we are, ready to go. Really pleased to be welcoming this particular guest to the podcast. So let me get into the intro. Okay, so I'm thrilled to introduce you to the excellent Halima Hassan. Halima was one of our game writing interns in 2022. I was super impressed with how Halima found her feet in her first major game writing role, essentially. Halima moved on from us to work with the game design collective Ghosts as lead writer, and in her newly minted game writing portfolio, Halima describes herself as being interested in telling stories that surprise, challenge, and deal in radical comfort. Super cool phrase. You should, by the way, check out her portfolio. There are some lovely pieces on there, especially the example scripts and design documentation shaped around a speculative project called Satiated, which is based on Somali folklore. So do recommend checking out Halima's work, and I'll pop some stuff in the liner notes so that you can follow that up. But in the meantime, Halima, hello, welcome. How do you feel about that intro? Anything you want to dispute, amend, add?
Hi, Hannah. No, that intro was really generous. Thank you. I'm happy with it.
You're happy? You're okay. Out of 10, how much would you give my my intro?
I think it's a very strong 10.
Do you know what, Halima, I've been listening to too much of the Taskmaster podcast, and at the end of every podcast, the host gets his guests to rank him out of 5 in the same way as they do in the Taskmaster podcast. And that just happened. It just happened in my brain right now. And that was pressure I put you under to give me probably a 10 out of 10, because you know how I like to win things. Right. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. And I'm really especially excited about talking to you because obviously a lot of conversations in this kind of environment would often happen with people who are sort of mid-career or later on in their career. But I thought it'd be really cool to invite someone who's sort of still forming their practice to talk to with them about the things which are shaping their early practice. And in that context, I wonder if you would like to share with us what your one cool thing is.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. I think I'm in the process of sort of figuring out what my practice is and what's important to me as a writer. And the one cool thing I come with today is just, I guess, the importance of communities generally, online and offline, in informing how I work, the priorities I have, and providing inspiration, and specifically an online community that I joined during the pandemic.
Wonderful. I'm really excited about you bringing in the concept community to the podcast as your one cool thing. I wonder if you wanted to just sort of set the scene about you and your context and how you've come to games writing before sort of leading into that particular community, because obviously communities are in context. It'd be great to know more about your context.
Definitely. So I'm London-based. I'm a writer with Somali heritage. Somalia is a country in East Africa. But I lived here in Europe, I suppose, for most of my life. I lived in Sweden until the age of 10, and then my family moved to the UK. And I've been here for almost 20 years though, which is weird to say. I have always enjoyed stories, and to some degree writing, be that sort of shorter, sort of random fan fiction stories when I was younger, and later on sort of my own short fiction. I wouldn't publish a lot of it. I mostly wrote for myself for the vast majority of my life. And I started off, I think, never really envisioning myself as someone like who wanted to write for other people, to be honest. It was just a hobby I very much enjoyed, and consuming stories in all of their forms is something I love. I love TV, I love books, I love video games. But uh, during 2020, 2020 was a very difficult year for a lot of people, including me, and I found myself just not really motivated to do a lot of things. But one thing I'm really grateful that I sort of agreed to do and agreed to sort of join is this online community that was set up by someone I follow on Twitter. Her name is Gabrielle de la Puente. Um, she set up this Discord. I'd never joined a Discord at that point. I didn't know what Discord was, but I thought it sounded kind of cool. I enjoy her work. She is a writer and a critic. And at the time, she'd began writing about video games, which I also like really enjoyed. And even though I had taken basically, I kind of played games when I was younger, but then I stopped for like 10 years and then I picked it back up again in 2021. And that was partly actually due to joining the Discord. But yeah, so I joined this online community and suddenly in this very like isolated and kind of lonely time, I found like a community of people that we all had this shared interest. And I guess we'd all joined because in one way or another, we were familiar with um, Gabriel de Fuente's work. And it's just grown since then. It was such an amazing space to be within. But even during that time, even in 2020, I think game writing wasn't necessarily something I thought I would be interested in. Um, but after spending some time in this community and just, I guess, absorbing the passion that other people had for video games, I thought, okay, well, I haven't played games in a really long time, but let me just turn on my brother's PlayStation 4, Gathering Dust. And yeah, it's it's a bit dramatic, but I remember exactly the date because a lot happened at the beginning of 2021, but it was like February 3rd, 2021, where I decided that I would try and play this game that someone had recommended me called Red Dead Redemption 2.
I found a place where we can get some shelter. Let Davy rest while he... You know. An old mining town. Abandoned. It ain't far. Come on. Come on! Yeah!
I'd never played a game on the PlayStation at this point. When I was younger, I had a Nintendo DS Lite, which, yeah, got lost, and then I just stopped playing games for a very long time. It just sort of opened my eyes to what video games had become. I just couldn't believe that video games could hold this kind of like incredible story and incredible characters. It was just is a very new concept to me. I became really, really interested in writing for video games almost immediately because something I had always enjoyed in my own writing, especially as someone who is a fan of fan fiction, is character and just exploring the human condition
Bridge coming up. Take it easy.
and what people do in different circumstances and the interactivity element of video games. It made so much sense to me for some reason. I was just like, this is so interesting. I definitely want to explore this skill, this profession.
You would not believe how many of the conversations I've had so far for the podcast have had 2020 being turning points for people.
Mm.
Like as practitioners, I mean, I know that we all went through I don't think I'd really can I don't know if I personally went through sort of a big kind of creative transition in 2020, but then also that's when I wrote my book.
Yeah.
So maybe like that was an articulation and a milestone that I placed in order to then work out where to go next. And I think almost every other person has also kind of noted 2020 as a changing point. Maybe it was a point where people were able to reflect
Mm.
or find new spaces. And so it's really fascinating to hear you sort of echo that theme. Super interesting. And then just to give Gabriela de la Puente a little bit more of a shout out. Gabriela is with Zarina Mohammed, the White Pube is the collective that they're known as,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
collaborative identity. It's a play on the white cube, which is a way that the gallery is sort of described. Sometimes the white cube in which you put art is sometimes a thing that people dispute as a means of it kind of showing art, and that's what they play, why they playfully call themselves the White Pube, because Gabriela and Zarina both sort of have developed this sort of critical partnership, which is about kind of not doing criticism about art, and they started out in kind of fine art, right, in gallery spaces.
Yeah.
Not critiquing art in the way it had always been critiqued. They both have very, art school kind of traditional fine art educations, art history educations, but they were just like, this doesn't speak to us. This way of looking at art and experiencing it doesn't speak to us. And so they've done a lot of really super cool work in exploring different ways of responding to art, essentially.
Yep. And just sort of that community that came out of not just the White Pube, but also specifically, I guess, Gabrielle's video game writing has been just such and it's hard to find spaces like that online now, I think. It is such a welcoming space, a creative space, an inspiring space. And it is honestly like one of the major factors why, as to why I've decided to play video games again. I was very much influenced by by that community. But also, I think if I had come to video games on my own, I don't know if I would have felt, well, I don't know, but there was something about being able to take whatever experience I have with a game and go to this community online and to talk about it with other people who have played it, or to talk about it generally with other people who have a great appreciation for video games, that just elevated my my love for the form. And I don't know, I think it was really exciting to me at the time to not only maybe explore this more interactive way of telling stories, but also potentially creating things that people could engage with and then form a community around, because there are lots of communities as well that come together over a single video game or whatever. But yeah, I think yeah, I'm not sure what
No,
else to
no,
say.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting that also your way in, your sort of return to video games as you describe it was Red Dead Redemption 2,
Too,
right?
yeah.
And it's I mean, it obviously has a story to tell, but in leaning into the sort of sandbox vibe of Red Dead Redemption 2, like part of the pleasure of it is exploring, and the fact that you can explore together with other people. There are some really beautiful works which have come out of Red Dead Redemption 2, which are not Western. There's The Grannies, which is a documentary short film, which some of my friends that are involved in, which sort of focuses on a group of players who have just sort of really pushed into the glitchy edges of Red Dead Online.
I think it felt like a spiritual experience to me. Just sort of stepping outside of this very grounded world into this ethereal other dimension. And then all of a sudden kind of coming back and then knowing there's this whole other world out there.
It's always seen as like it's a bug or it's broken. We love the outside probably just as much as we love the inside of the map as well. Something we just really want to appreciate.
It's a really beautiful film, which is sort of beginning to be sort of exhibited around the world. And it very much like that's on the like arty end of responses to this space. But I think one of the real thrills of those spaces is using those tools to tell stories as a kind of player author.
Yes, yeah, 100%. And I think that kind of connects to like my earlier and yeah, my appreciation for like fan fiction when I was younger. Because video games, as you say, it's not just the writing and the story, but they, provide an environment and that you can just explore and and create from as well, especially the sort of really large open world games. And I guess, yeah, all of that was super exciting to me. And I just remember thinking, okay, this is a thing I want to explore, but how do I even begin? And at the time, I mean, another thing that came out of the Discord, the community, is that people would post opportunities that they would find online. So that's another reason why I'm so grateful to that space, because not only did it sort of point me to a range of creatives that I could follow on other social media platforms, but everyone is so generous and willing to share opportunities that they come across for development or, just for entertainment or whatever. And I came across a game jam called the Self-Care Game Jam. And I thought, this seems accessible. I've never done a game jam before. Let's give it a go. And that was when I first learnt, or I guess downloaded and used Twine. I guess that's where my video game writing education sort of began. Just sort of being introduced to this tool to create branching stories that's free and really user friendly, I think, was really exciting to me. I just remember thinking like, wow, this is quite straightforward. I think I could try and like, use this tool for my own ideas. And also just being in that game jam space, another sort of really creative and inspiring community.
I feel like one of the things I'm sure you've heard me say this, I repeat quite often to sort of early career people in video games, is that you can overestimate the value of mentors several steps ahead of you in their career. Like certainly there's value to be found there in speaking to people, 5 years ahead of you, and what pitfalls you can avoid, all that kind of thing, those kinds of mentorships. But in my personal practice, my entire career, whatever art form that I've been in, I've found incredible value in peer mentoring, in, especially in storytelling. Before I was running a studio, when I was coming into studios and trying to fix story problems, very often I was working in an indie space where I was the sort of only story professional in the room. And to make people hear you in that room, you very often have to sound very confident that it's worth spending resources on this thing, when they also have a billion other competing things that they need to spend resources on. So I would have to sound 100% confident that this is the thing that needed to happen to make the story work. But the way that I think most people work is that you need sounding boards and you need people to sort of talk through problems with. And in that context, having peers, having peer mentors, can be really, really valuable. And also they're facing the same challenges you are at the same time. They are, maybe getting the same kind of opportunities. And if they can't take the opportunity on, they might share it with you. I think, yeah, the value of peers is kind of underestimated in developing your practice.
Absolutely. So not just having people who are like-minded and similarly interested in video games, but a space where everyone just sort of is willing to develop together. And like within the Discord, there are people of like at varying points in their careers. But it's never felt like I can't ask anyone a particular question, or if I'm stuck, everyone is just more than willing to help other people out. And I hope, if anything, I've learned that, well, I like to think I was always like this, but it feels good to also be able to give back in some way, and to share opportunities that I come across, and support people whenever I can, because it feels really good when you hear about other people's successes, and also being able to share your own and that being celebrated too. It's just, yeah, it's a really great feeling, and a really, again, motivating feeling. But yeah, so after that game jam, I think I continued to sort of work on my own thing, but this is around, I guess, towards the end of 2021, which is when the writing internship opportunity was shared in the Discord for the studio Die Gute Fabrik. And I remember so clearly thinking to myself that this is a long shot, but it's a shot I can take. And again, yeah, that was an opportunity I came across through the communities I joined. And yeah, it's just fast forward, but then there was another community, which I guess is the studio as well, which I found very supportive and motivating as well. I'm just realizing that like before this video game sort of development interest began, I've always relied on community in one way or another, be that finding people in real life with similar interests, finding people who have a similar background to me, because that's also a way to, I guess, feel a bit more settled in the world. And as someone who has moved around a bit, even when we were here in the UK, I think there's always part of me that's looking for ways to connect to others. And the internet's made it a little bit simpler because you have these spaces that are already carved out around a particular interest, just like I guess how the Discord started. So you already have something in common with the people who you're talking to. In real life, it's a bit harder maybe because you sort of have to be open and talk to people and engage with people before in order to establish, I guess, that common ground. It's not a given thing like with online communities, but connection is really important to me. I don't know how I would feel if I was isolated from other people. I think I would be very uninspired actually because so much of my work just comes from my experiences and just how much I enjoy other people. And yeah, one of the many things, just like a ton of other people that I struggled with in 2020 was the isolation, which I was happy to do to keep myself and my loved ones safe and others safe. But I really do enjoy being around others. So it was really difficult, very confusing for me as a person. Only because I realized that so many of my interests, so much of what I do involved others. Like I was really just I was going, to events with my friends, shows and whatever, and I just suddenly couldn't do it. And I've never really been good with like phone calls and stuff. So I don't know. I feel like just finding this community that year was such a um in my mind it was a blessing in many ways. It felt like, okay, I can continue to develop connections even from my own home, really meaningful connections too. I mean, now, gosh, like this is the third year of being in this online community, and I've met so many people now in real life now that it's a little bit safer, and it's been really wonderful. And I'm just glad that I found a way to continue engaging with others and forming connections, which again settles me as a person and makes it okay. Well, makes it makes me feel like I'm able to create if I have the ability to sort of talk and engage with other people.
One of the things that made you stand out to us when we were looking at applications um in the internship, I think is just how human your writing is. And that's been my experience of working with you since you joined us. And I'm really excited for what you're sort of doing next with Ghosts, because I think that it sounds like you're really energized by other people. And I think that you're such an interesting sort of listener. I feel like the way that you listen has a particular quality to it, which I find really calming. I hope everyone listening to us is like feeling the chill vibes of this sort of podcast in comparison to others, because I feel like, Halima, you are an incredibly chill presence, very centered. And I feel like the reason your writing is so human is a lot to do with how you listen and connect to people.
Thank you. That's a really lovely compliment. I yeah, I think, I don't know. I would describe myself as a good listener, I think. I try to understand where other people are coming from and I try to extend empathy. But I think the interesting thing about living is that I've, especially these past couple of years, and just the fact that I'm so online now and I hear so many things, I think I've been tested with like how far my empathy extends. This is like totally taking away from like the main subject of this conversation, but no, it's been really interesting personally as for like personal development, and things like that, and also sort of in my writing, and some of the writing I did for the project as well. It was just really interesting, I think, to think about, like, you can always think of yourself as a number of like positive qualities or whatever, but um yeah, I've learned that there is still a lot for me to learn and understand, and I know what I want to be, which is generous and honest and kind. And I know that those are not things that I can just guarantee, because life is so interesting and so unpredictable. And sometimes you're faced with situations where you're like, actually, am I doing the kindest thing right now, or am I offering people as much grace as I could? And yeah, so life can challenge you in that way, but writing is really interesting as well because you can create these scenarios and you can think them out on the page as well. Ah,
Another really underestimated thing, probably one of the strongest tools in my toolbox, is forgiveness, right? As a writer, um, and forgiveness in the direction it's often most difficult to offer it, which is to oneself. Like I I am really good at forgiving myself for, I don't know, maybe I've set aside 5 days for a piece of freelance work, and I don't do any work for the first 2 days. Now, a lot of people would get really angry with themselves. And in some ways, I actually think that energy is really useful because then you get all the work done in 3 days and it's fine and you deliver the thing, right? You needed that energy to like light the fire underneath you. But I've got pretty practiced at sort of holding that energy, but not like feeling it in my heart. Like I'm holding the angry, like the frustration, but not like it's anger at me, just that it's an energy that we use the word anger for, but it really is like a fire being lit underneath a rocket. Um, or like ideas percolating, like going, actually, I need to listen to myself. Today I need to go for a five hour bike ride. And while I go on that bike ride and think about nothing, actually, lots of wheels will be turning in my mind that tomorrow turn into a story. Um, and forgiveness will be your strongest power when you're rejected for an opportunity, like forgiving yourself, forgiving them for when your peers are excelling and you're not excelling right now. That if you can be lifted by their energy rather than if you can forgive them for like or forgive the world for the fact that you're not there yet or you're not there right now, then you will be lifted with them, as opposed to sort of feeling isolated. So I think that word forgiveness is super powerful.
absolutely. And I like what you said about like holding whatever feelings and not necessarily making them a part of you, because I think, as you've like implied, like it's so important to recognize even the maybe slightly negative, what are the negative feelings, but maybe the unideal feelings that you might find yourself experiencing. It's okay to be like, actually, I feel a bit frustrated right now, but yeah, to take that feeling and not necessarily um internalize it,
Yeah,
or
or like
yeah.
so there's a really wonderful book called Burnout: The
Mm.
Secret to Solving the Stress Cycle by Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski, who are sisters, and they wrote a book. And it is incredibly science and evidence based, but written in a really sort of pop science kind of way. So it's super accessible. And they really it's not one of these like solve stress and become the boss lady kind of style books. It's much more acknowledges patriarchy, acknowledges white supremacy. It acknowledges transphobia. It's a trans-inclusive book about how stress in particular manifests itself under patriarchy, under all of those intersecting weights on our existence, and it acknowledges all of that. It says that it's not your problem to solve stresses that like those, but stress is also a thing that happens in the body. It's a thing that there are real physiological things you can do to resolve the stress and move through it. And they have this thing that they repeat really usefully often, that feelings are like tunnels. You have to go through them to get to the other side.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually one final thing I want to pick up on, because you've used this word a few times, and it's a word actually that I think I have less of a handle on. You've used the word grace. Funnily enough, my name means full of grace, which is, probably like reverse nominative determinism means that I'm always tripping over my own feet. But I wonder if just sort of as we get closer to the end of the podcast, if you could just tell me, do you have a definition for grace? Like, what does grace mean to you?
When I think of grace, it's more of a feeling. I think extending grace is being generous. I think extending grace is trying to be objective. I think, grace is, oh gosh, this is going to sound a little bit wishy-washy, but I do think grace is like the instinct. I think instinctually as human beings, we want to relate and understand, but a lot of things come in the way, our own personal experiences, our own sort of values, and sometimes that can cloud what we should do, which is to just take a situation or people as they are, and then thinking about how, and maybe there isn't a way to actually, because not all interactions will necessarily develop into like a meaningful relationship, but but I think grace allows for that too. It's like seeing things as they are, seeing people as they are, and then making a decision from that, trying not to let your own sort of preconceived whatever ideas or feelings cloud how you receive others.
Yeah. I think that all of us could practice our participation in life with more grace. As someone who likes words, I just did a little Google because I was wondering about, the word as the world sees it, and lots of what you said there is here. Favor, mercy, pardon, courtesy, clemency. I mean, I suppose some of these words are mixed up in some religions and
Yes, yeah, a lot of religious connotations, I think, to grace, which for me is important, I guess. I'm a practicing Muslim, so I do think of it from that point of view as well. So yeah, maybe that's like disclaimer. Another community I subscribe to is people who practice Islam. I have a strangely like conflicting feelings about when it comes to my faith and my practice, because I think whether I like to or not, it does sort of bleed in. But I used to actually be quite aware of that and try to almost remove. For some reason, I just felt like I had to not bring that part of me into my work, which doesn't actually make any sense, because how can you not bring yourself into your work to some degree? But funnily enough, I listened to a really interesting podcast with a game dev. I think his name is Salavier. I can't recall his surname at the moment, but I'll share that link with you, Hannah. In this podcast episode, he talks about his Christian faith and how that informs his work. And it was really lovely to hear and listen, because to paraphrase, and I hope I'm not, I hope I do him justice, but he essentially says that he tries to bring in the compassion that he believes in and that is part of his faith into the worlds that he creates and the experiences that the characters have within these worlds, because he believes every human being, deserves respect and grace. That's fundamental to his own beliefs, and it's part of his faith, and that's what he tries to reflect in the work that he produces. So I think about, for myself, I have values that are informed by my faith, and I do try to echo them in some ways in the writing that I produce, and things like that. And I think you can do that without obviously being like very explicit or anything. It could just be, yeah.
So I should wrap us up now, but I was wondering if there were any sort of final thoughts or lessons, maybe even sort of speaking to other sort of early career people in video games, about your one cool thing, which is community. I mean, you can repeat things we've already said if you like, or if you don't have much more to say, we can leave it there.
I am so grateful for the various communities I've come across, especially in the last couple of years, online and offline. And I think, yeah, community is like the foundation for my practice, to be honest. It's the connections I form within the communities that inspire me, and inspire my work. And I'm really grateful for the people I've been able to meet through the online communities that I've been a part of the past few years. And I'm excited for the communities that I'll come across as well, because I don't think it's like a be all and end all thing. At least for me, I'm always really keen to sort of just get to know more people and expand my worldview.
Okay, so I'm going to try and maintain the super chill vibe that Halima brings to any kind of room that she's in, and keep this, out of all the episodes, the one which is most suited to falling asleep to. I'm not going to start barking exciting things at you, and we'll go out of this one in a chill kind of vibe. Thanks again to Halima for bringing to us the concept of community as her one cool thing. Obviously, less sort of specific, more general a concept than some of the other things that we've been thinking about together. But I think super valuable one, and I hope you enjoyed the directions that conversation wandered in. Thank you so much for listening to One Cool Thing from Die Gute Fabrik. As usual, leave a rating or review where you can, and if this time was of value to you, that's the best way for you to say thank you to us. I'll be back soon with a new episode, speaking with another cool thinker and maker in the field of video games, and in the meantime, check out Die Gute Fabrik on, for now at least, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. That's GUTEFABRIK. Stay thoughtful, friends. Take care, and goodbye.